Welcome to On Fire with Matthew Maurer. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending when you are hearing me. Today we're going to talk about the NBA draft and the idea of high schoolers not being allowed in the NBA draft. I mean, what are the drawbacks? What are the positives? What are the constructive criticisms that they shouldn't be in the NBA draft? On Twitter a couple days ago, I had an interesting, last week, I had an interesting conversation with Mark Eisenberg and Michael DeCourcy. Now, both these guys, if you're a basketball fan, you probably know Mr. Eisenberg from his excellent book, Money Players. If you haven't read it, please do. And Mr. DeCourcy, who writes for the Sporting News. Both excellent basketball minds. I really respect what they do. Great point of views all around. Hard to say anything that they talk about doesn't have any substance to it. It definitely does. The discussion started to get into why are high schoolers excluded from the NBA draft? And, you know, I hear people say, well, they're excluded from the NBA draft because of development needs to happen for them, and you know, you don't want to really be in a position where you have to develop guys, and the NBA isn't a point of development. And that's kind of where you know, DeCourcy has his viewpoints. And me, Mark Eisenberg, and I think a large contingent of the basketball community feel that doesn't matter. A lot of these high schoolers, let me rephrase that. I won't say a lot of high schoolers, but there are definitely a handful of high school players year in and year out that really don't need to go to college. Not in the standpoint of where they are and where you project them to go. And I love when people talk about high schoolers, because the problem with the discussion is it's two-faced. And they try to make a double-edged sword for anybody who disagrees with the assertion that high schoolers don't belong in the NBA draft. And the reason why I say that is because guys like Charles Barkley, and I've heard of a whole host of other people, they'll totally dismiss Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, Tracy McGrady, Moses Malone. No, they don't count. They don't count towards it because they were going to be pros regardless. And then they want to throw Kwame Brown, and then they want to throw Leon Smith at you as a sort of validation about their point. And to me, it's completely asinine. If you're going to bring in Leon Smith, a kid who had bad background troubles, a kid that many people, including myself in the '98 draft, did not have as a first rounder. I had Leon Smith pegged as a late second undrafted player. You're damn right I'm going to include those guys in the discussion, because I'm sorry, it's a joke. If Kobe Bryant and Kevin Garnett didn't do well, you guys would throw them in the conversation. So now that they did well, guess what? I'm going to put them in the conversation, because you either got to accept it all or you got to accept none of it. You can't pick and choose what guys you want to include in the discussion when it results to the NBA draft and allowing high schoolers in. To me, it's pointless. You have to put them all in. Dwight Howard, Josh Smith, even the guys that, you know, don't have the sparkling resume, the guys that, you know, didn't do what people thought they were going to do, Corleone Young. You're going to have to put those guys into the discussion, and I'm fine with that. Put them in the discussion. Let's talk about Reggie Harding. Let's talk about all the guys that didn't do well in the NBA draft. But if you're going to hold me for Kwame Brown never developing, then you better get ready to hold all of college basketball, because LaRue Martin didn't develop what people thought he was going to do. Kent Benson didn't develop into what people thought he was going to do. And certainly Michael Olowokandi did not develop into who people thought he was. These are all college players with at least 3 years of college experience. So I have a hard time separating that the way that everybody else neatly likes to. I think you also have to take into the case players who maybe didn't become all-stars, but have certainly had productive NBA careers. Those guys like Lou Williams, Amir Johnson, Andre Blatch, Sebastian Telfair has been around for a while now. Even Darrell Wright has carved out a 6, 7, 8 year career. These aren't laughing careers. I mean, they're doing longer than a lot of guys that were drafted out of college. You know, I can give you a whole host of them. Just let me know if you want that list, because it's a long list. And don't get me wrong, I understand the point that people make that the NBA isn't a developmental league. You're absolutely right. But don't tell me that the NBA shouldn't allow kids in just because of that. Because you have this thing called the NBDL, the Developmental Basketball League. You know, the one that every NBA team pays money into to develop players. I think that's a lazy argument. I think it's a lazy point. And look at the other guys in the draft. Tyson Chandler, Amari Stoudemire, Kendrick Perkins, LeBron James, Deshaun Stevenson. I mean, this is Deshaun Stevenson. People like to laugh and clown at, but this guy's been in the league now for 12 years. You know, you can say whatever you want about him. He's been in the league now for a while. Al Harrington carved out a nice career. Rashard Lewis, Daryl Dawkins. There's a whole host of guys that have done well that weren't maybe top picks. And they've outperformed the international market as a whole than the international market's given you. There hasn't been many guys that have come over that have had long, successful NBA careers. It just hasn't happened. You know, in 2003, you had a whole, you named it, just about, I think, 8 picks went in the first round were international players. Out of all that 20 players that were picked in 2003 with international ties, only Leonardo Barbosa was ever a starter and ever had a career in the NBA that was longer than 6 years. That's not progress either. So on one end, I hear what people are saying, but listen, on the other end, the North American player dominates 80% of the NBA landscape. That means the 20% goes to the international and other leagues. Well, you're telling me a kid who comes from the most fertile ground of basketball should not be able to go pro if he's not considered a top blue chip player? And I'm sorry, that makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. And in the conversation also, we talked about Emmanuel Mudiay, who is going overseas to China and signed a contract for $1.2 million. Now, the prep to overseas has been a jumbled bag of success. On one end, you have Aquil Carr and Jeremy Tyler, who didn't do what people thought they were going to do. With Aquil Carr in particular, his height was always a detriment. But in the terms of Jeremy Tyler, who left high school as a junior and went overseas, the bottom fell out and he plummeted to the second round. He was able to revitalize his career with Coach Bob Hill in Japan, but for the most part, he didn't do what people thought he was going to do. This Jeremy Tyler was a top 10 basketball player in the United States, and he's basically struggling to hang on in the NBA as we currently speak. On the other end, you have Brandon Jennings, who went overseas with a very mixed bag of success and went 10th overall in a very dominated and very heavy point guard class. Brandon Jennings is a success to me. Maybe he's not the guy that people thought he was going to be, but even the player he's compared to didn't do in the pros what people thought he was going to do, and that's Kenny Anderson. So I'm not entirely shocked. And then you have Mudiay. You have to wonder if Mudiay is able to parlay this experience in China and become, say, a top 3 NBA pick in the 2015 NBA draft. I think that changes the discussion for a lot of North American athletes, because Dante Exum, for example, got drafted this past year, and he basically, he's almost like a high school senior in the United States. Dante Exum, maybe he's the exception to the rule, but let's be honest. Dante Exum, for all intents and purposes, is a high schooler. He was drafted. You're sending the wrong message to our kids that, okay, I need to go overseas so I can get money and I can get the shortcut to the NBA, which a lot of people, and rightfully so, are saying Emmanuel Mudiay is taking a risk because over in China the coaching's not bad, the coaching's not great, and the developmental chances are low. But I say to them, well, SMU is a different story, but who's to say you develop much? If you rated an ability on a scale 1 through 20, and let's say Emmanuel Mudiay's weakness was dribbling or ball handling, and you gave him a rating number of 10, that 1 year with Larry Brown's not going to make him an 18. He's going to have still time that he's going to have to develop. And I always think people really overrate that 1 year of college, where you're telling me that Derrick Rose, Kevin Durant, that these guys are an aberration. When Brandon Jennings did it, it was like, what? Why is he doing that? When Jeremy Tyler did it, it was like, what? He left after his junior year. This is crazy. When Aquil Carr did it, it really wasn't a shock. When Emmanuel Mudiay did it, it wasn't a shock, but it was a surprise. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, listen, I have a vested interest in players that are picked in unique circumstances because, I mean, that's what I do. I evaluate and reference points in the draft to see how the tide changed. And the idea of potential got developed by Shawn Kemp in 1989. Shawn Kemp, for all intents and purposes, was basically drafted out of high school. Shawn Kemp was a top 5 player coming out of high school. I mean, you're talking about a high school draft, high school class that had, Alonzo Mourning, Chris Jackson. Shawn Kemp was posted, All-American at Kentucky. His freshman year never happened. He then went to a junior college but never played. And basically Seattle took him 17th. Basically didn't know what he was 16th and didn't know what he was going to do. They had no clue what Shawn Kemp was going to do. They couldn't tell you nothing. They didn't know. They had no clue what he was going to do. And Shawn Kemp, when he started to continually up his scoring average and he started to become an all-star, that's when potential started to come into conversation with NBA players. Because you take a guy that young and you take a guy in the first round and he develops into an all-star, that's potential at its finest. Now, some people will disagree with me, and I'm sure they'll bring other historical points, but to me, Shawn Kemp is the first guy. He's the godfather of the word potential because he literally was an unknown commodity going into the NBA draft, and he literally developed into an NBA all-star. And ever since then, there was a pause. Players were starting to, you saw players slowly move with potential. You saw international players start to infect the NBA draft, like Tony Kukoc in 1990. And then you have this explosion in 95 and 96, which then, sets off a revolution for high schoolers. And I remember a lot of people didn't think Jermaine O'Neal should have went pro. I remember people didn't know if Kobe Bryant should go pro. And I knew a lot of people that said that Kevin Garnett shouldn't go pro. So all these people that are telling you that they shouldn't be counted towards NBA out of high school pros, like the positives of that, they weren't that loud when these guys were drafted in 95 and 96, because I was chronicling it. They were not that loud and boisterous. No, when Kevin McHale picked Kevin Garnett 5th overall, there was a lot of guys that questioned that pick, and there was a lot of people that were saying, oh man, you're kidding me. Really? You take a guy who's an unknown commodity? Really? People did not believe in Kevin Garnett like that. And the people who say they did, whatever, I need proof. Most of these guys didn't believe in Kevin Garnett. Well, let me rephrase that. They may have believed in Kevin Garnett, but not to the point of making him the 5th pick overall. And then after that, it was Kobe Bryant in 96. Kobe went 12th. After that, people said, wow. And Kobe went 12th because there was really no guard that had ever done anything. So he was, again, another unknown commodity. Then Tracy McGrady goes 9th. Okay, Tracy McGrady, same conversation. Unknown commodity. He's a guard. Don't know what he can do. Then 98, there's a little bit of pushback because Tracy McGrady didn't come out like gangbusters, and Kobe Bryant really didn't come out like gangbusters because he had to deal with Eddie Jones at the Lakers. So in 98, you kind of see the pushback. Rashard Lewis, who was promised 3 times by the Houston Rockets in the first round that he would be selected, didn't get selected. Now, those picks, Michael Dickerson, Mirsad Turkan, and Bryce Drew, those picks all together didn't do what Rashard Lewis did in the second round at a high school. So then people said, wow, maybe we should go back into taking guys. Jonathan Bender comes out. Oh, we're going to take him 5th overall. Then Leon Smith comes out. Leon Smith was a barely top 20, high schooler, and the Dallas Mavericks reached for him. Well, the kid had personal problems. He was a ward of the state at a very early age and rebelled when he was faced with some discipline from Donnie Nelson. So, you have that backlog. And then in 2000, you had Darius Miles, who went 3rd overall, which was even higher than Garnett. And he was another guy that slowly bubbled and started to make a name for himself, and he wasn't a gangbuster number 1 overall either. Then 2001, somebody finally took the leap of faith and took Kwame Brown number 1 overall, followed by Chandler at 2 and Eddie Curry at 4, and then Desana Diop at 8. That kind of lets you know that the high schoolers were not only there to stay in the NBA draft, but the high schoolers were going to be a part of the NBA draft and a very early part of the first round. And then in 2002, you had Amari Stoudemire, who many people questioned maturity-wise because of his rocky, family history with his mother and his father. He goes 9th, becomes one of the best, it's just not one of the best, but becomes one of the best rookie years for a high schooler. And when healthy, he's a dominant player at power forward. And in 2003, you have Mr. LeBron James, you have Travis Outlaw, Ndudi Embi, and Kendrick Perkins, all, varying degrees of success. Kendrick Perkins is probably the guy that has more success than Ndudi and the Kid Outlaw. Both those guys, just never could put it together, and EB was basically out of the league pretty early, pretty quick. 2004 saw an explosion. You saw Dwight Howard, Sean Livingston, Robert Swift, Sebastian Telfair, Al Jefferson, Josh Smith, J.R. Smith, Darrell Wright. Just an explosion of high schoolers coming into the draft, all with, again, varying degrees of success, but none that you can really say. You tell me who did better. You tell me, did Al Jefferson outperform Rafael Arujo from BYU, who the Toronto Raptors took 8th? Yeah, I say he did. Very easily. And then you have the 2005 NBA draft with Webster, Bynum, Green, Miles, Ricky Sanchez, Monta Ellis, Lou Williams, Blatch, and then Amir Johnson. Again, varying levels of success like any group would have. Ricky Sanchez should have never been drafted. I don't know why there was this era of mystery with him. And again, that's the other end of this. Anybody who has an attached international type background, they get more hype. I mean, that happens in all phases. I mean, you look at the gentleman from New Mexico that got drafted this year, Cameron Barstow. I didn't think he was better than Kem Birch, but he got drafted. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's Australian, and that many people feel that he'll go to the NBL, and develop more. So Ricky Sanchez, I feel, is kind of on the same lines. Again, wasn't even a great prospect. I mean, his high school teammate was Peter John Ramos, who people bid on and said that he was this phenomenal prospect, and he wasn't. Peter John Ramos is actually a fun story because Peter John Ramos got drafted, but yet when he was in New York as a high schooler, never even was better than anybody in New York. Like, he he was like, he was just known to be tall. He wasn't really known to be a great player. So again, that gives you a little bit of perspective. But you know, it's a mixed bag of varying results. And at the end of the day, I just think we need to be fair with people who are in the process. I think we need to start really reevaluating how the NBA draft is handled, how it's viewed, because I think the perception is sometimes the problem behind the draft. The NBA draft is not the NFL draft. In the NFL, production immediately is what you're drafting for. In the NBA, potential along with maybe production is kind of what you aim for. If the NBA draft was like the NFL draft, Doug McDermott would have went number 1 overall. It didn't happen. In very rare cases does it happen where the guy who produced the most in college gets drafted the highest. It doesn't really happen. And this year in particular, you saw it in football with Johnny Manziel kind of slid despite having all the numbers. So in the end, I don't blame anybody for not liking high schoolers going to the NBA draft. I understand it's a touchy subject, but at the same time, I just don't think enough respect or enough vision is truly given to the teams that took certain high school players and the high school players themselves. I mean, for every Kwame Brown, I can name you, a Martell Webster or a Kendrick Perkins who maybe didn't do what people thought they should do, but they're still in the league. And how do you say if somebody's a 10-year pro, which Webster isn't yet, but he will be. How do you call him a bust? How do you call a 10-year pro a bust? I mean, I don't know if you can. You can certainly say they're a bust according to where they were picked. But again, what's the bust part? Is the bust part the player? Is the bust part the observation? Is the bust part the evaluation? Is the bust part the projection? What's the bust part? So just give you a little something to scratch your head on. Again, you guys have any conversations you want me to talk about? Anything that, any topics of merit that you guys think I should talk about as it pertains to the NBA draft? Let me know. Drop me a line. Appreciate you guys sharing the videos, and look forward to talking to you guys soon. Talk to you later.